They say you regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did do. Now I'm on a conveyor belt moving at a constant health and safety approved speed towards a pulverizing. I begin to reflect on one unrealized dream in particular. As far back as I could remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Welcome to the podcast. Got a theme song at last. Even got a guy to play his guitar. Now I need to come up with the words to sum up what the show is about, and I'm stuck. What a predicament.
I'm Alex, and this is the podcast that pounds the pavement in the process of picking apart the predicaments of the modern day and age. What a predicament. The huge success of the GTA franchise. Tony Montana inviting you to greet his diminutive companion. The cool hitmen of any decent Tarantino film or manga series. Chart-topping songs literally singing the praises of Slangin' That White. The Joker's legion of fans. What makes a bad boy seem so cool when everyone knows real cool is recycling and respecting your parents? Why do we like the criminal who, if you met him, would probably jack your shit? Well, to pick over this particular predicament, I've roped in another trial co-host for this episode. He knows a thing or two about walking on the wild side as a bona fide rock star. Gerald Stewart, a.k.a. the General. G'day, mate.
How you doing? It's great to be back here at What a Predicament.
Thanks for coming on this journey with me.
Bad Boys, the allure.
You're not that new to this. You've done the co-host thing before.
I have. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hear it was highly successful.
Did you learn anything in your time as a co-host of the drive show on Radio Hodaki that you could bring to What a Predicament?
I can hit the ball back pretty successfully, I think. I've got a not bad sounding voice. It's actually, I'm a bit hungover today, so I've got that dusty vibe going on, which is always good on a mic.
Yeah, the only thing to be aware of is we don't want anything too time sensitive because this might not come out for a wee while. So just whenever this comes out, you'll have to be hungover when it comes out, so it's like still relevant, you know.
The chances are good.
So you actually gave me an idea for how to do this episode, which is already putting you right up the top of the list of co-hosts I've been trying out.
Oh, mate.
And that was to record this in two parts. One where we ignorantly, just wildly discuss a topic without any facts or figures to speak of, and then another chat after we've done a little bit of light reading, and then see what the actual research says. So do you remember the name you pitched for that kind of...
No, I don't.
You called it Speculation Humiliation, which I thought worked quite well.
Oh, that's God. Well,
no doubt.
That is gold, actually. I'm quite proud of myself for that one. Speculation Humiliation.
So this now would be the speculation section.
And we're speculating on why do people find the anti-hero, the infamous, alluring?
Because you've spent some years in rock and roll. Do you have, like, any bad boy or girl heroes that you're like, oh, this guy's living a bit dangerously, but god damn it.
Yeah, well, I always, like most people in the rock world, always thought Keith Richards was the tits and The Who and all that, Jimi Hendrix smashing his guitar. And when you actually, like you say, if you actually met a gangster or you actually come across somebody who's like that in real life, and it's the same, like in backstages and stuff, it's, well, when I was younger, we'd get a bit drunk and riotous and stuff, but I've never trashed a hotel room. I think Matt Heath once told me a story. He was talking to Tim Finn, I believe it was, and how he used to, like, after the gig, you'd always go out and go drinking and try to keep that high of the gig going, but you never really can. So his whole thing was, as soon as the gig's over, I go home to bed. Like, that is the highlight of the night. I'm not going to top that feeling of being on stage and performing, no matter how much drugs and sex or whatever I do afterwards. I think there's a boredom factor in it too, right? Because the bad boy or the anti-hero thing is exciting. It's the last thing being a bad boy is boring.
Because it is such a 180 from your normal life. You know, you live a day job, you work a day job, you smile at work, you're polite to your colleagues or whatever, or you serve customers. And then what's like the almost like exhaust fumes, the like venting that it takes to manage that. On the other end, I've got to I don't know, play in a metal band, or I've got to scream, or I've got to go boxing and like smacked around.
And I'm not a sport guy, but I think that kind of comes into it too, right? If you're playing like a sport that's got physical violence involved, like boxing or Muay Thai or league or whatever it is, even soccer or whatever, there's an element there, I think, because there's the sporting bad boy as well, right? And like. It tends
John
to be
McEnroe.
And it does tend to be a male thing, right? Like there are female anti-heroes, but they're not as many and as ubiquitous as the bad boy.
I mean, you've got your Joan Jetts and stuff, and I don't know how much of that's as kind of a performative character versus how she is in her personal life, but yeah, it's not as common as like I think of the rebel without a cause, the guy riding in his motorcycle wearing the leather jacket, and you're kind of intimidated by him, but you also kind of want to be him because he's got that freedom. Yeah,
because you spend so much of your life, I find anyway, in your head worrying about what other people think of you and how you're coming across or whatever. And the classic, that kind of characters, one of the things is they don't give a fuck what people think about them. That's one of the defining traits in some ways. Is like the Joker, there's a great character that obviously does not give a fuck about what anyone thinks of him. He just does what he wants to do, and he's crazy as all hell. I think that's the thing, like if you've been in the cafe all day serving customers or working in the real estate place or whatever the hell it is, and you've had a shit day and you've just wanted to punch your boss and kill a client, and you've got that all bottled up inside. After work, you go to the movies and watch the Joker up there on screen doing what you would like to do for an hour. It's cathartic.
You fire up a copy of GTA 5 and you just go blast some security guards, or
or even just real life guns. Like if you look at American culture, it's a big part of at the end of a hard day. You go out the back, you grab your gun and you shoot some shit. Because it's loud and it gets your adrenaline going and it's dangerous and
you feel powerful, or you feel like you're able to achieve stuff. Because with like gangster stuff, the success of like any Scorsese film, or from Casino to Goodfellas to Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather series to the Mafia series of video games, that's like, or The Sopranos.
Totally.
I recently watched an Italian series called Gomorrah, which is great.
I haven't seen it, but it sounds good.
It's really good. But anyway, I find that the coolest stuff. But they're all reprehensible people. Every one of them's a bastard. But there's this kind of this cool ethos of wearing the nice suits, of kind of being charming or being successful, having the lay of the club, like in Goodfellas, where they did that infamous tracking shot where they go right through the back and he gets to sit up the front by the performance. It's just, I guess that is vicariously, you're like, wow, that must be the best possible lifestyle because you're a VIP everywhere you go.
Yeah, and you don't have to be at work at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. You have a boss, but it's more of a family kind of thing.
I did hear something about how that, specifically the book The Godfather, was kind of very fictionalized in that it wasn't an accurate representation of what people who live that life are like. They're not that cool, they're not that well-spoken, they're not that smart that they're planning 5 steps ahead of the cops or whatever. They're actually kind of just thugs. But he imbued them. When he wrote the story, he kind of made up this, we'll give it this culture where it's got this, it's all about honor or it's about family or whatever. But apparently because in real life, gangsters rat on each other at the first chance they get.
Yeah, and they shoot each other and they're fat, ugly rapists and horrible
pieces of shit. Yeah, they're responsible for like horrible shit.
Well, I've always had there's kind of a worshipping and I call it not worshipping, but because I come from Timaru and within the what would probably be called Bogan culture or whatever, there's the gang scenario there. And it was like, those guys were not sexy or cool in any way, I could tell, if you know what I mean. I found them scary and horrible, most of them, and not at all somebody you'd want to model yourself after. But I remember playing at the gang headquarters and there'd be girls from the local high school there drinking and partying and hanging out with the gangsters.
Just wanting to live part of that lifestyle.
Yeah, I think being around danger is thrilling, It's like shooting a gun or jumping out of a plane or whatever. Being around danger gets your blood going. It's not boring.
Or even probably watching a scary movie. It's like you're straying out of the safe territory and you get that kind of rush.
You'd think with society, with feminism, with all types of progressive movements, that, like you say, the reality of the bad boy character or the anti-hero would start to lose some of its shine. I mean, you can kind of see that within comedy and music now, with a lot of people being outed about bad sexual behaviour or whatever. I think I don't think any young person coming up today thinks that they can just go on the road and have sex with whoever they want. And not that you can't have sex with whoever you want, but take advantage of people because of your position in a band or whatever it is. I don't think. But like I say, that's the thing. It's like, why do we like it in movies?
Yeah.
And why do we like it in figures that are public figures, but we wouldn't want that
In real life.
in our real life?
Well, yeah, and like thinking of music, like there'll be popular songs that you could sing along to that are all about like, I don't know, I've got my 9 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's about like slang and dope, about like having guns, and there's like a million suburban middle class kids who are like, yeah, that's so me or whatever, and it's like they've never touched anything like that.
Yeah,
so it's what is it about like the criminal element that you're like, oh man, that's where I want to be, or that's like super appealing. And I guess these people do portray themselves as wealthy or successful or able to. It's kind of like what would you do if you weren't held to the same rules as everyone else? Which, in the case, as you pointed out, rock stars and probably famous actors or directors or whatever can get away with a lot of shit because socially, there are lots of people whose incomes depend on them staying on top. So,
and there's the idea that within a creative space, there's certain liberties taken with the normal social norms, if you know what I mean. Like, bands are notorious for doing truckloads of drugs and staying in the studio on week, and that's all being paid for by a big multinational corporation that's quite happy that they're doing it and making lots of money off it, if you know what I mean. Whereas it's personally destroying those people and their family and friends around them.
It's kind of marketable to have the most outlandish.
The more I think about it, the more I think it's a danger thing and it's a boredom thing, right? Because if you're a white middle class suburban kid and you've got this nice house in the suburbs and it's really safe and your mum drives you to soccer every Wednesday or whatever the hell it is, the idea of being a gangster is like just the opposite of who you are, and that's kind of what's so great about
some
it.
21 Savage or something.
Yeah, like an urban person who's involved in street life. It's so completely the opposite of who you are.
Yeah, and maybe it's kind of, again, this is all speculation, but yeah, maybe there is an element of like feeling guilty about your privilege to a certain degree.
It's like personal branding, right? Like I want to rebrand myself from being Carl from Toronto to being Little Pump or whatever, like, like, I don't know if it's behind the curtain kind of thing, but like when you talk to most comedians or people, they're like, sometimes find the audience, like I've even found it with radio sometimes, that people don't realize how they think everything's off the top of your head, that the comedian's just walked in the room and just started talking. They don't want to know that person spent 6 months writing that material, they've practiced 100 of it. And if you go to see this person tomorrow night, you're going to see the exact same words in the exact same order. People don't like that for some reason. Like even though they know it's true, they don't want to. They want to just suspend their belief.
All the music has been selected very carefully to appeal to a demographic that they can advertise to. It's not like
it's so
I'm just going to play the badass music because I'm the bad boy of radio.
Yeah, I was listening to some like classic,
and I can say that as the bad boy of podcasting.
You are. I'm quite scared at the moment. I hope my parents don't find out I've been on this podcast. It could really go down bad at Christmas dinner. Because I think that's where it gets dangerous, right? Like it's all fine to like the Joker, but you shouldn't really want to be the Joker, literally.
Yeah.
You don't want it to cross over. Like I think it's the thing here. Why we like it out there, but we don't want it to cross into our personal reality. And we find people who take things like being into the Joker or being into Iggy Pop or being into Keith Richards or being into Joan Jett, or whatever it may be, too much. Like they actually want to be that person.
It's like a break from reality.
Yeah.
This is kind of a slightly different aspect of it, but when I was considering this topic, you think of like all the brilliant, for instance, like, I mean, there's a massive interest in serial killers, specifically in podcasting.
Yeah, that's massive, the crime podcast deal, right?
But also just in fiction and movies and movies from Seven to Manhunter or whatever. There's something about the serial killer is like, they're so engaging because they're usually these geniuses who are 10 steps ahead of the police, and they're leaving clues that it would take a very, very clever person to like piece together, and you think like, oh wow, they are so able to do whatever they want, and so you kind of, I don't know, maybe there's something, a lot of them are portrayed as intelligent, and I think some of that and villains in general is based on, again, speculation.
Yeah.
But like it's based on just sort of classic story structure where the villain has to be a threat, so you have to make the villain powerful or able to achieve. You realistically can think they're able to achieve what their goal is, whereas the hero is usually just someone going about their day who gets dragged into this world. Whether it's Bruce Willis in Die Hard or Luke Skywalker in Episode 4, you kind of suddenly you're like, okay, now I have to contend with this massive threat and I can overcome it. But you've got a proactive villain, a reactive hero, and I think there's something about seeing someone who's proactive and going after what they want or very successful at it, or the fact that Hans Gruber has double, triple bluffing the police is like brilliant. You're like, man, that guy's cool. Like, and even just thinking, like in the language we use, man, that's gangster to mean like something good. Yeah, like, when someone, I don't know, someone aces a test, if you got the number 1 score in the whole country at school, you'd be like, damn, that's gangster. Like, that you've done some badass stuff. And it's badass, when it's like, actually what you're doing is very socially constructive.
I mean, that's how that culture and art functions as an escapism mechanism, as a relief from the ordinary world. And again, like, if you're a safe suburban kid, I think we return to that because we both probably are kind of from that type of a background ourselves.
It ain't the streets of Baltimore.
No, there's no gangsters walking around.
But I love The Wire. It's like...
because I always thought why are all TV shows about police departments? And, it's always there's certain tropes in terms of what we like in terms of entertainment.
I did a previous episode on this podcast, which, as I say it, I now realize is very similar to this one, but it was specifically looking at the rise of true crime and the proliferation of like serial killer and murder and everything from CSI to again true crime podcasts or whatever. Why there's such a fascination with like murder when you think like we should be repelled by it. And I was talking to Dr. Dean Burnett, who's a professor of neuroscience, and he was saying to go back to telling a story, it's automatically the highest stakes. It's more engaging and the stakes are higher. There's more of a threat when it's something about murder or crime or the police have to stop this bomb going off than if it was just, oh no, I'm going to be late to soccer practice.
Yeah, so if you sat there and I told you the story, I don't know, of David Bain or whatever, your dopamine and serotonin levels would probably rise because you do get that reaction to even just being told about something dangerous.
It's so out of your ordinary life that when you hear something, it sounds unbelievable. You're like, real,
Yeah, if someone walks into the room and goes, shit, I just about got hit by a bus. I nearly died 5 seconds ago.
That's,
you already had a sympathetic adrenaline. What is it? Catharsis, I think, is how it's normally think of. Looking at something horrible on a movie or whatever allows us to escape somehow our fear or
there's some way of like you're sort of processing it without having to...
Yeah, like safely going through it without having to do it, which is what a lot of culture is, right? This is why they have stunt men, because you couldn't stunt people because you couldn't just actually throw people across the... it has to be fake because you don't want it to be real, but that's why it's enjoyable. Or something.
But then again, true crime is super popular, so it doesn't...
So that is true, right?
But then I don't think that there are people like... You always hear about Richard Ramirez or Charles Manson where there's like, they're getting marriage proposals while they're in prison.
Yeah.
And that's, and I think Dahmer as well, like got married in court or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, they've always got like hundreds of pen pals.
While they are popular, I don't think it's quite as, it's not like the Joker where you'll see, like in this office where we're recording this, there's like a little Joker figurine on someone's desk out there, which is like cool. Yeah. I like the DC universe. I like the comics, graphic novels, but you wouldn't see necessarily a little Dharma. So there's something about when it's fictional, it's easier to like. Whereas if it was when it's too real, you're kind of like, that's kind of weird that you're super into Ed Gein or whatever.
Yeah. Another thing is it's like 80%, like, I don't know, again, speculation, but it's largely female audience for the true crime stuff, right? Because I think, who was it I heard talking about it? And the woman was saying, well, as a woman, you spend a lot of your life worrying about being the victim of crime. Like the people serial killers kill would pretend to be women. So it's like, as a woman, you've always got that fear with you. So that
you're more aware of it.
Yeah, so I think it's the catharsis thing too. If you spend your whole life that men don't have to, in terms of waiting at the bus stop at maybe 11 o'clock at night. I'm not having thoughts flicking through my mind that I might be sexually assaulted or killed any minute. Whereas as a woman, if I was an attractive young woman at the bus stop at 11 o'clock in the morning, that's got to be flicking through your mind, and you're kind of looking around and trying to stay safe.
You have to be on your guard.
Yeah, you've got your, you've got your keys in your hand, and you've got
so maybe consuming all that stuff, you do feel like you've achieved something, because you're like, okay, noted. If someone comes up and it's like, hey, can you help me with something in the trunk of my car? You're going to be a bit more wary because you heard about Dharma or whatever.
Yeah, and if it's something you've been speculating about in your brain, to hear about real life instances of what you've been worried about kind of gives you ownership over it. Like, you feel like it's not such an amorphous threat at that point. It's more of a real thing, I suppose. So it's like, yeah, no, you are right to worry about this. This has actually happened in the world, and I'm going to tell you about it now. And you get the dopamine spike, you get the serotonin coursing through your veins.
Another aspect that I was thinking about is maybe it's like a heightened version of reality when you see a gangster pulling something off, or a criminal doing some genius heist or whatever.
Yeah.
Like the way if you've read Plato's The Republic, he talks about designing the society, because he's like, if you want to find out about an individual, you look at society, because it's easier to see something on a big scale than it is to look at something small. So in that way, you get say a song like YNW Melly confessing to murder and Murder on My Mind or whatever, and you're like, again, there's kids who maybe have never committed murder that will listen to that, and you're like, yeah, man, I get it. Because it's such a heightened, exaggerated version of them being like, yeah, I too have done something that I feel guilty about, or been in a situation that left me quite like shooken up or whatever. So, and that's just a heightened way, so it's easier to latch onto than some really niche real life drama about a couple that are experiencing, some sort of marital struggle or something, which I like those movies too.
Because there is something definitely, not punk in cool way, but being a punk. Like if you're a person who isn't really a gangster at all, but you dress like that and you pump the music and you try to pretend you're that, but then a real life gangster comes along and you run like it's got, like you put on the mask, but you can't back it up. That's like really unaccepted in human culture, right? Like, you shouldn't, if you're going to say that you're something, you should back it up. And there's nothing more pathetic than somebody who acts all tough or acts like they're one thing, and when the real version of it turns up, they disappear back to their safe suburban life.
Well, that's got me thinking, maybe what we're doing right now is a lot of talk about, we know what we're talking about, we're discussing, we're talking about how the brain works, we're talking genes, we're talking how it influences
Plato's
society.
The Republic's turned up.
We've quoted Plato, or paraphrased Plato. So maybe, unless there was something else you had on your mind, we could...
No, I think we should proceed to the humiliation
We
aspect.
could ask Dr. Google what's going on. We'll see if we can dig up any actual answers and come back with what we came up with. And, with the magic of editing...
3 weeks later.
The humiliation of our humble hypothesizing is here. How do you feel? Is there any point in even recording this half, or do you think we just nailed it 100% first time?
I'm going to have to be honest with you here, Alex. I seem to remember saying at the end of the last podcast that I was going to go away and do some heavy thinking, do a lot of research, and come back entirely prepared and ready to do myself and my family proud. That is not as what has happened. I have entirely neglected to research anything at all apart from a cursory Google search. So I'm hoping that perhaps you did the homework and I can maybe look over your shoulder and hope to pass.
Well, I mean, that wouldn't be out of the ordinary for What a Predicament. That is kind of the token level of work that goes into these episodes. But I did manage to find a couple of things to back up some of the things we said. And
I'd be very interested to hear what you found.
Oh, one of the first things you actually brought up was about the idea that bad boys tend to skew male, even just talking about it. We say the rebel without a cause guy on his bike. And according to Psychology Today...
Whoa!
Sources, baby. That's actually a pretty fair representation. Research has revealed more men than women tend to possess the dark triad personality traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism.
Wow, that's a hell of a triad.
Yeah, and from Psychology Today,
Yeah, that's straight up research, bro.
Man, I'm crushing it.
Oh wow! So what is the dark triad again? Narcissism,
Psychopathy,
What's psychopathy?
the traits of a psychopath.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, I did some research. I'm not going to say I did all the research.
I want to start a band called the Dark Triad. The lead singer's called Narcissus,
Yep,
and
it's a three-piece.
it's a three-piece.
So once-
Psychopathy's got to be the bass player.
yeah. I also read a whole book that
Holy
I haven't finished, but I did read a chapter called The Allure of Evil Characters in a book by Hirohiko Araki. In his book Manga in Theory and Practice, he writes, "Humans aren't always pure and good, but carry an ugly side within themselves. It's just that in normal life, morals, laws, and other rules of the world keep those baser natures from display. When an evil character freely exhibits those normally hidden desires and acts in a way the readers could not, the readers can find great catharsis. By providing an outlet for the ugly feelings that we all share, you can depict a more lifelike range of emotions than those of only goodness, and in doing so, you can more effectively evoke readers' empathy."
So that idea of the good and the bad character are almost the splitting of a normal personality. Like the good side of someone and the bad side are represented
yin
as
and the
two
yang.
separate characters, but we all have the villain within.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's getting to the point that to show a hero is not necessarily that relatable if they're just someone who is entirely good or entirely selfless. I think even a good character has to have some weaknesses or something in order for you to really connect to them or be able to put yourself in their shoes. It's hard to put yourself in Superman's shoes because unless he is finding... There are Superman stories I've read where he has self-doubts and he is not sure of his role or what he's supposed to do or his outsiderness.
Have you ever heard Dan Harmon's Superman rant?
Probably. If it was on one of the episodes of his podcast, I would have.
It's really good to say that's why he's just a completely useless character. And if he was, he would be Lex Luthor and he would stab him in the heart with kryptonite. Why has nobody ever just made a knife out of kryptonite and stabbed him in the heart? He's just because he's an alien, right? He's not even from Earth. And he comes here with all his special powers, and the rest of the humans just have to sit around and go, "Oh, Superman."
I mean, since the days of Superman, now the people we watch on TV are your Walter Whites and the anti-heroes and EliteDaily.com. What more reputable source is there?
Elite Daily.
Elite Daily posted an article about why the anti-hero is the most relatable character on TV today. They said, since we're all flawed, one of the main things that attracts us so much to the anti-hero is that same idea. It's relatable. Since there's no such thing as a perfect person, why would you want to watch one? There's nothing you can connect to.
Yeah, it's like a Barbie doll with no genitalia or whatever. It's just perfect and plastic and unrelatable.
You can't, yeah. And I talked about how in fiction, you've got these genius serial killers who are 10 steps ahead of the detective. In real life, killers tend to have a lower than average IQ statistically. And I think that idea comes from the fact that a couple of people in the 70s managed to get by police. Probably wouldn't happen today with the development of technology and forensics.
And to be honest, in my experience of any criminals I've known in my real life, they didn't tend to be geniuses.
On the topic of mass killings, the GTA franchise, Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, I remember talking about that.
We were like, what is it that draws people towards it? Do people actually want to go mowing down sex workers on the street? But according to Newzoo's game franchise consumer insight service.
Oh, we need consumer insight.
GTA, it's one of the highest critically rated games in the entire industry. So it's even aside from what you do in the game, just the gameplay, the development, the revolutions they've made in graphics and that open world sandbox
amazing
style game makes it so great. So when in the same way as an Academy Award winning Godfather film, when something is presented in such an effective, amazing way, of course the subject is going to be more appealing because it's put in such a good light. Yeah,
I think it all comes back to that catharsis thing as well, right? Because it's seeing things you wouldn't necessarily want to happen to you or that you are afraid of or wouldn't want to happen in the real world. Seeing it acted out on stage enables you to go through the range of emotions associated without any real danger. So you get that rush of dopamine and all the associated stuff purely through an active imagination rather than having to experience it in the real world.
Which would just leave you with PTSD.
Yeah.
You brought up in the first half of this podcast the concept that the bad boy is not boring as to one of the reasons they might have such appeal. And
Yeah.
HuffPost published 3 reasons good girls like bad boys. And they described the good girl emotional adrenaline junkie. Exactly what you suggested. Bad boys tend to be more adventurous, less predictable. They're not stuck in their 9 to 5. Unfortunately, there's a psychological condition where some people associate love with pain or being hurt, and it could be from a parent or whatever that's a figure where they're supposed to be a source of love. If they treat them bad, it's kind of they grow up with this connection between those two things.
Yeah, we've all known people like that. I've known people like that of both genders, actually.
And that's another reason why people who have grown up in this way, the people they look for with love, they also are, I guess, unconsciously finding these traits that are...
I had a friend like that, and he was like, as far as I could tell, his logic internally was, if I can't make that person so mad at me that they try to claw my eyes out and physically assault me, it means they don't really love me. If you know what I mean? Like it was, that was his, he needed that test almost. Like, that's how I experience love, is that you losing it.
And again, when we were talking about the yin and the yang before, the idea that it's two sides of the same coin, it's love and hate are so intertwined. Why, if you broke up with someone, does it turn from love to like, oh man, screw that person so quickly? Because it's the same emotion. It's just
it's the only one that's big enough to fill the hole, you know.
And as far as why gangster shit itself is so popular, David Chase, creator of The Sopranos, he said, I think people are basically tribal, and to be with a bunch of people who, except he said this in an American accent.
Yeah.
If you can imagine. I think people are basically tribal, and to be with a bunch of people who at least we say these guys will back me up and I'll back them up no matter what. I think that is what was very appealing, that idea.
Yeah, well, it is that. Especially gangsters are a subset, right? It's like a rugby team or whatever. It's like you've got your crew, and it's almost like the same thing with bands as well, which probably plays into that bad boy thing. If you've got 3 or 4 other people that you've spent a lot of your adult life with around you, whenever you walk into a room together, you're dealt with as an entity, you know, like there's always safety in numbers like that.
And the whole idea of this episode was if we should really hate gangsters or these bad boys or not be attracted to them, yet we do embrace them. According to HistoryNewsNetwork.com, they did an analysis of the silver screen / TV gangster, and they were saying they kind of identify a lot of the American values specifically, and I guess American culture is pop culture especially in terms of media, film and television.
Yeah, especially when it comes to, well, I mean, there's always been portrayal of violence outside of America, but they've really made it their own.
There's so many, like if you look at Scarface or nearly any of them, their Scarface is an immigrant come in with nothing and has succeeded. That's the American success story. He's living the American dream, and so and they, as a culture, traditionally, they've been very attracted to those sort of showy signs of wealth and success. The flashy cars and.
Well, it's the classic case of it's usually people who get money. If their parents were poor and they become rich, they tend to be showy with it. People who have had money in their family for years don't tend to be that showy with it. It's that nouveau riche thing. Really rich, old school rich people don't talk about money.
No.
At all. Because it's very rude to talk about it.
It's
like talking about your cock or whatever, And I think there's a difference between being transgressive in terms of social norms and being somebody who is a criminal who does violent things. Like, if you know what I mean? Like, there's a bit of a difference between Iggy Pop and, I don't know, a serial killer or an actual gangster.
I think a lot of that is a failing on me to really have a clear idea what I want this podcast to be. I kind of was like, we'll do something about bad boys.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's cool, though, the idea. Because I think we talked about it maybe a bit. The idea that Iggy Pop's playing a character on stage. So it's like watching The Sopranos. It's somebody playing a character. It's not real life. Whereas if you're walking downtown one night and walk around the wrong alleyway and get knocked over the head and
There's
get your
a-
wallet stolen, there's nothing sexy about that.
There's an old dude with his shirt off.
Yeah. So
like,
like a cigar and somebody pulls a gun on you and takes your watch.
And it's funny because we are so influenced, or I say we, I know that I was very influenced by a lot of movies like the Godfather series, etc., and The Sopranos, and where I can even pluck out lessons which I learned in those things. Like, oh wow, that's a great way of how to handle a tough situation or whatever. And part, like, there's this whole aspect of snitches get stitches, and you know, you don't rat on your friends, and there's nothing lower than a rat, which is in a lot of these movies. And so I kind of thought, oh, you know, maybe there's something to that, to the idea of, you know, stuff's going on, you just keep your head down, you know, they'll do whatever they want to do, maybe it's in your best interest to not. But you apply that to real life, and that's how, you know, your Weinsteins and stuff get away with what they do for so long.
It's
because
very tribal, right?
Yeah, because I guess it's in other people's best interest. Why bite the hand that feeds? If you work for the Weinstein company or whatever, it doesn't benefit you at all to shut this down, even if, you know, socially it would be the better thing to do in terms of the betterment of the situation for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think sometimes politically it's almost a benefit because it ties those people who are keeping your secret even closer to you. So all the people around Weinstein who knew he was a sack of shit, but still worked with him and took the money and didn't say anything, they were going to be more loyal to him. It's like that thing, it's tied the tribe together. Yeah, the inner people know that secret about Harvey, and that's what unites them as a tribe. You know, we're the secret keepers for Harvey. That's where we make our money.
And it just goes to show these lessons that do seem so cool at the time. You're like, oh man, that's cool. Like, I always thought it was cool, that scene in The Godfather 2 where Robert De Niro, they toss him a bag full of guns, and you know, they're like, look after this, and you know, he looks in it, there's a bunch of guns, and he's saying, oh, okay. And then later they come to pick up the bag and they say, oh, did you look in the bag? And it's like, I'm not interested in stuff that doesn't concern me. And I thought that was playing it really cool. He could have got himself killed by those guys, but instead he was like, it's none of my business. And I thought that was, oh, wow, okay, that's quite a cool way to handle yourself. And now I'm reflecting in this year of our Lord 2019, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, maybe not speaking up is actually making you, in a way, culpable of a lot of these things. Well, thanks for bringing your co-hosting skills to What a Predicament. How have you enjoyed your time here?
I've loved it. Thank you so much for doing all the heavy lifting on the second half. I don't feel overly guilty about it now. I was worried coming into it, but I feel like we were reasonably onto it. But I think the big lesson I learned is there is the big difference between a caricature portrayal and real life. We want to see it in art, we don't want to see it in our lounge. I think that's the whole allure of it, right?
Well, and that probably applies to many genres. I love the old Transformers TV show, but I would hate it if there were giant robots in my living room.
Actually, I think one of the things we didn't touch on was the modern phenomena of the world star video violence stuff, just those little short bits of chaos from the outside world.
Where people love watching like a street fight or...
Yeah, horrific in real life. And as soon as you see that, you get that little bit of adrenaline going. You get that little dopamine kick. Watching somebody else get hurt. I don't know. I saw this study, again, of speculation stage again, but it was
edit this earlier into the episode.
It was that idea of if you really want to do something like, I don't know, giving up smoking or do a project or whatever, it's actually a bad idea to tell other people that you're going to do it. Because in the act of telling the other people, you're getting the reward that you were hoping to get from doing it almost. So that's why you end up not doing it, because you've pretty much got the reaction you wanted by telling somebody about it.
Which brings it full circle, because all the lessons I've learned from so many gangster films is keep your mouth shut.
Keep your fucking mouth shut.
Oh, you're from the monastery. The monastery.
Is gangster something you are or something you do? Perhaps Tony Montana said it best when he posited, "You don't have the guts to be what you want to be. You need people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy." What a predicament. Thanks again to this episode's trial co-host, Mr. Stewart, He was last on the podcast in 2016 when we had a chat about his old band Deja Voodoo way back in episode 3, if you're interested. Thanks also to local hip-hop crew The Monastery with a THA for this here tune titled To Gangster. I'll link their SoundCloud in the description of this episode. Engineering in this episode was by Alex Bain. What a Predicament is produced by Alex Bain and written by Alex Bain. It's presented by Alex Bain with special thanks to Alex Bain. You can check the next episode before you wreck the next episode in 2 weeks on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this now. Now. Oh man, it's hard to see from this particular vantage point buried under all this rock, but this conveyor belt's been moving me steadily towards the big heavy press this whole time we've been recording this, and I'm about to get pancaked. And there's nothing less gangster than a pancake. In the words of Kendrick Lamar, damn. Huh, how fortuitous. A power cut saved my bacon. Hello? Hello? As I thought, no one's around to help me out. This whole factory's automated. I guess a quick smushing is actually looking pretty good right now. If the alternative is probably dying of hunger stuck in all this rock. Pancake's starting to sound pretty good right now.
Hey, you podcast listener, keep your fucking mouth shut. Nothing happened here.